Morning, everyone. As you all are all trickling in and getting in from the waiting room, I want to start by welcoming you all to the Fall 2023 GSA Forum. So we will get started in just a moment, but while you're entering the room, if you haven't already, we ask that you please fill out the digital sign-in link that you're seeing in the chat from Marisa. So go ahead and click on that and sign in. And while you're doing that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Atlee Keller, and I am from Stantec. We're really happy to see you all here today at the Fall 2023 GSA Forum. I'll start with some logistical pieces for today's forum. So first is that we are recording today's event, and the recording will be made available after, along with a list of all of the resources that we share in the chat. We've also enabled closed captioning. So if you want to turn that on, you can look at the bottom toolbar and select the CC and turn on your closed captioning. We also have the chat open. So if you see a friend in the chat, you can go ahead and direct message them. You can also respond to chats in thread. So again, welcome everyone. And we're going to start with a fun, quick activity. In the chat very shortly, you will see a link to a Poll Everywhere poll. Thank you so much. And if you go ahead and start clicking on that, you can answer the question, what are your most pressing needs when it comes to wells? And make sure as you're doing that, you can see that you can load other people's responses as they're typing that in. If you see a response that resonates with you, you can go ahead and thumbs that up to upvote it, and it will rise to the top. And you should see the changing order of these pressing needs as you're reloading. So I'm seeing things, I'm seeing irrigation, measurement, replacement, responsibility from homeowners and domestic wells. Things are moving up. Need to know which wells are active, as well as data sharing. Construction, I'm seeing a lot coming in. Fractured rock aquifers. And you should be seeing this on your side. You're seeing other people's responses to your comments as well. Monitoring networks, meter and telemetry, absolutely. So as we see those rising, you can keep upvoting, keep commenting, and thank you all for participating. With that, I am going to hand things over and introduce our first speaker, Deputy Director of Sustainable Groundwater Management, Paul Goslin. Paul, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Atlee. Great to have you all here today. Really looking forward to the webinar today. You know, we're kicking off this new water year. Last year was definitely one for the books. And the reality of adapting to, you know, a new normal, jumping between extremes of drought and flood, and what we saw last year is that it happening at the same time is really challenging. But this environment also provides opportunities to streamline processes and leverage collaboration and really explore, you know, solutions to some of the compelling problems, and some of them were listed in the opening exercise. So today our panelists and participants will be discussing some of these opportunities as they relate to well management topics and approaches. These are critical conversations. They're real timely and important, and we're excited to help foster these discussions through this platform, the GSA Forum. We offer these forums to support implementation and local control of groundwater management, and hope you find these events beneficial and that this platform helps you find ideas and for solutions to some of your challenges. So now I'd like to turn it over to SGMO's new Assistant Deputy Director, Keith Wallace. So take it away, Keith, and thank you all.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome all of you to the Fall 2023 GSA Forum. My name is Keith Wallace, and as Paul said, I'm the Assistant Deputy Director of DWR Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. I'll be your moderator today. Thanks for taking the time to participate in this event. We're really excited to have you all here. We've got a packed agenda, which I'll cover, in a few minutes, along with other, meeting logistics. But first, I really want to talk about the overall intent of the GSA forum. Next slide, please. So I'm seeing a lot of familiar names in the virtual room today, and I know, many of you have attended the GSA forum or a GSA forum, in the past, so you're familiar with the approach. But for those of you that may be new to this GSA forum series, I wanted to share, really what we're trying to accomplish with these events. As Paul mentioned, really our key goal is to support you, and Sigma implementation. And so it's like through events, like this, that we're trying to create a space for you to exchange ideas and interact around topics, related to Sigma implementation. So, we really want to be able to highlight Sigma successes to see if they can be replicated, in other parts of the state. But we also feel it's important to share, the challenges and lessons learned, from those challenges in hopes, to avoid them elsewhere. Lastly, there's an opportunity here for you to provide some input on potential state assistance efforts, as well, like through a breakout session that we're going to have today. Today's event is completely virtual. The virtual option allows, many of you the opportunity to attend these events that otherwise you may not be able to if you had to travel. So we do plan to continue to host these meetings regularly, and also we'll explore hybrid options in the future. All right, next slide. So here's our agenda for today. The main components include a panel presentation with a question and answer session. We're also going to have one breakout. We'll be splitting you up into smaller groups to give you an opportunity to interact with some of the participants and to connect on well management approaches. And then lastly, we're going to have two DWR assistance update segments where we're going to provide you with the latest on our assistance efforts related to well management topics. Next slide, please. So in terms of logistics for today's forum, please keep your microphone muted and your camera off if you're not speaking. Try to ensure that your Zoom profile has your first and last name associated with it. State your name before you speak. If you encounter any technical difficulties, please contact Christy Clark, who is our Zoom meeting host, via direct message on the chat. Next slide, thanks. And then as far as our theme, we know that well management is an important component of the implementation of GSPs and achieving long-term sustainability. So during our event today, our panelists, like our speakers, and you are going to be connecting around various well management topics and approaches. We'll be talking about enhancing basin understanding through development and updates of efforts such as well inventory and well registration programs. And we're also going to be connecting on efforts related to leveraging and taking advantage of basin local level coordination, particularly efforts that involve counties and they include well permitting approaches that have been taken to comply with the executive orders N722 and N323, and also the implementation of Senate Bill 552, which requires counties to establish a standing drought task force and develop drought resilience plans for rural communities. So to help us get started today, talking about enhancing basin understanding, we're going to have an assistance update from two of our managers with DWR Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. We're going to have Ben Brezing, who's a supervising water resource engineer, and Stephen Springhorn, a supervising engineering geologist. They're going to be providing you with an update on DWR's groundwater wells and monitoring network. So go ahead and turn it over to Ben.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So thank you, Ben Brezing. I help lead the data unit in SIGMO. And in SIGMO, we host the online system for well completion reports and other programs like CashGym, the SIGMO portal, and dry well reporting systems that all collect data around wells. So we share ourselves the need for well inventories to help improve all these programs, have a central node to point to. And then Stephen will go over other well-related resources as well. So next slide. So I'm recycling a few slides that I originally created a couple of weeks back to talk on the topic of well inventories and DWR's efforts in front of the last Drought Resilience Interagency collaborative, the DRIP collaborative. Julie Ekstrom, who leads this effort for DWR, reached out to SIGMO, and we formulated kind of the problem statement around the lack of a statewide inventory and the relevance to drought and more generally to climate extremes and groundwater management in general. So I think we all understand that well inventories are fundamental to groundwater management. And in this presentation, I think I'm not going to show any great graphic of a precise vision of what the solution will be, but kind of formulate the problem statement that I think we're all dealing with. Then I'll look forward to the panel discussions later that would also inform us what the state's role can be to help solve this issue or work towards a statewide inventory. And not just of domestic wells, but really of all wells, and not just of active wells, but really of all wells throughout their life cycle, and then tracking their status. So next slide. As I said earlier, SIGMO does host an online system for well completion reports, and as many of you know, while it is a great resource statewide and probably the most comprehensive resource of well records throughout the state, that we heavily rely on too for well reporting, it has its data gaps as well, and doesn't serve all needs, but as we'll show now, it is a tremendous resource that many, including DWR, rely on. So these numbers are a little bit, the slide is a little bit dated, so the numbers have gone up, and I think Stephen may have more updated numbers. But throughout the state, we have upwards of 300,000 production wells, including domestic wells and high capacity wells. And next slide, thank you. And you can skip to the next slide as well. And based on the well use that is specified on well completion reports, you can filter this data set down to domestic use or irrigation wells, for example. And on the bottom of the slide, you see the link to the resource that we make available to the public of the statewide data set for anyone to use. So as I said before, the OSCA dataset is a great resource, but it's one example of many inventories that is not complete. So OSCA does not have records for all wells. And the information for specific well completion reports may be incomplete or sometimes insufficient for any specific use. And OSCA does not track the operational status of wells other than its original construction and reported modification or destructions. But with the switch from having water well drillers submit paper records to DWR to the online system for well completion reports now some 7 or 8 years ago, the data quality and data availability has greatly increased. And we continue to work on improving that system for also local agencies to tie into. So this slide here really lists a whole bunch, and it's not comprehensive, but a whole bunch of other programs and efforts that work on either creating or maintaining well inventories or data sets around wells that are all loosely connected. So obviously you've got the local well permitting efforts administered by counties, the cities or water districts, the online system for well completion reports by DWRs, and then some new and some really seasoned local well inventory efforts that we'll hear about. The dry well reporting system is another program, is another example of a program that collects status information for wells, but it's also not a complete inventory of those. And then there's other programs like GAMA from the board collecting water quality data associated with wells, or CASGIM collecting groundwater levels connected to wells. And all these programs share a need to tie into a central statewide inventory so that these different programs don't all have to cross-reference each other. And no one program really has the scope, authority, or the resources to really carry the weight of maintaining such an inventory, at least not so far. And of course, some programs come close. So the next slide and my last slide is a somewhat messy diagram of kind of how I mapped out how I see information flowing. And it is messy, because it's probably not a great slide, but also because the world out there is pretty messy. And as I tried to map this out, like everyone, you tend to draw yourself in the middle of a map. So therefore you see the well completion report database in a map, but arguably maybe well permitting or local well inventories should really be in the center of this. Again, this is more the problem statement. This is not necessarily what the solution looks like, but part of this slide is on top this timeline where reporting really happens, both to well permitting agencies, but then also to DWR. And you may notice that I used some dashed lines for reporting where there's really no enforcement around it, and therefore it's lossy. That explains in part why the well completion report database is not complete. But also highlighting how the well completion report database, there's a relationship to well permitting. So some permitting agencies, I think most, require verification that a well completion report has been submitted to the department. We would like all permitting agencies to make that a requirement if that's not already the case, which really helps with the compliance of reporting to DWR. And then this triangle of local well inventories, starting off in some cases with permitted records, as well as well completion reports. And we hope that these local well inventory efforts will feed back into the OSCA database to improve that. But another point of this slide is that because there's no one statewide complete well inventory of all wells, all these programs have to point to each other and cross-reference each other with all these well IDs that these programs use. And while in the short term, things that can be done to improve the coordination, one thing that we've done on the OSCA side is to add a notification feature that LEAs can register their emails with, so that whenever we receive a well completion report, you get notified with a permit number, with a well completion report number, and with a parcel number, so you don't always have to log into the system. And then also to help facilitate potentially the coordination between permitting agencies and GSAs. That feature is also available to GSAs, so you can register your email address there too, so you would also get notified of new wells. Just looking at my slides for a second. So DWR has ongoing conversations with the Water Board and also other organizations like the California Water Data Consortium on the need for well inventories and the requirements that it would really take to help solve this problem. And one thing is obviously minimum data standards and to really utilize existing workflows to maintain these inventories. It's one thing to compile an inventory, but then to keep it up to date. Then obviously also thinking about the resources that it would take on a local level to maintain these inventories. And if we're not working towards a truly centralized, managed statewide inventory, that the state's role can be to federate local well inventories into a statewide data set. And part of that we see, similar to what is being done, has been done in Oregon, is that any well inventory should really also include a well label effort, so that there's a physical well ID, so that if somebody goes out to the well, they don't have to guess or wonder how accurate their GPS is. They know which well that is. And how that works in Oregon is that any new well gets a well label, a tag installed, and then that needs to be verified too with a photo to the state. And every time owners can voluntarily register the existing wells, but whenever a parcel is sold, any well on a parcel has to be registered too. So we see that also being part of that. And then if such a program that really would track statewide a well inventory, or local would exist, all these programs that currently point to each other in a circular fashion would have a central program that they can all refer to for a truly a well ID and not just a well completion report ID and so forth. So again, I said it wouldn't be the solution, but more the riffing on the problem statement. So I'm looking forward to listening into the panel discussion on local inventory efforts, and I'll hand it over to Stephen.
All right, thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Springhorn, and I work with Ben and others in our Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, and I lead our technical assistance section. And I just wanted to provide a little bit more information on different activities that we're working on right now, or data sets that are available that you might be interested in related to wells. And just a little bit additional context building off of what Ben just highlighted in the wells in California, which are really our built groundwater infrastructure, if you want to think of it that way, how water comes out of the ground. And then really tying that in with our natural infrastructure, our groundwater basins that we all know and care a lot about. Really, this drives how we all monitor and manage these basins. And it's really how we're looking at how to enhance our monitoring efforts at the state and working with you all and others across the state to fill data gaps, get higher frequency data. And so I'll just highlight some of the new things we're working on in that front. And if you could do one more click again, and then all of this is really geared towards the management side and all the work that you all are doing and others on SGMA and groundwater management activities. But it is important not to lose sight of the non-basin areas. Although not a lot of groundwater is pumped in the non-basin areas, it does make up over half of all domestic wells are in these non-basin areas. So we are thinking of ways to work with locals and support the monitoring of these non-basin areas more so than we have in the past. So next slide, please. So just wanted to highlight a couple of different links, and we can put these in the chat, but I would say that one of the best ones that has a very comprehensive list of different tools, data sets, and then a description of how those might be applicable for well-related items or work is our recent drinking water well guidance document and related toolkit. So Heather Shannon, one of our SGMA colleagues, led this effort with a team. And it's a really great document that describes all of these different well-related resources, how they could be pulled together to inform local monitoring and management. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at that. And it has all these other slides in it, or all these other links in it. But just a quick highlight, the dry well reporting system that Ben mentioned, that is out there and available for use. You can sign up and get notifications when dry well reports are submitted in your basin or your area of interest. So that could help track that side of things. We have a new Be Well Prepared campaign that's really focused on getting educational materials out to actual well owners so they can prepare themselves and their wells going forward. And then Ben mentioned the statewide well information. And then what I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive right now on is our statewide groundwater monitoring. So if you have any questions on these links, please email that sgmps@water.ca.gov or put your questions in the chat today, and we can get to as many of those as we can. So next slide, please. So what we're trying to do is we've gotten some recent resources to really enhance our ability to monitor and support you all at the local level and others to monitor, enhance groundwater monitoring in California, which is really exciting because we know there's a lot of work that has been done, but there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled, both spatially and temporally in the state. So what we're doing is we're organizing this statewide groundwater monitoring initiative and enhancement under our existing CAS-GEM program. And so if you haven't heard of CAS-GEM, it's been around for a while now, and first came to be in 2009, and it stands for the California Statewide Groundwater Elevation Monitoring Program. So it covers every square inch of California, and really is meant to have groundwater elevation information coming in so it can be used for whatever purpose across the state. But we know that since CAS-GEM started back in 2009, the groundwater landscape has changed a lot with Sigma. And so we have reconfigured CAS-GEM to be compatible with Sigma. So everything goes into one spot so we can all use it collectively, the information that comes in. So next slide. And just a quick touch on how we've done that. So it's taken a number of years, but we have restructured everything behind the scenes. And so you have different windows or funnels of information that come into a centralized statewide data system. So all of the groundwater stations and measurements come into one spot. And so regardless of if groundwater levels or data comes in from Sigma or CAS-GEM or any other source, it's coming into one centralized spot, and then we're making it available on our open data platform so you can connect to it or utilize and have that up-to-date information, which is a big step forward in just trying to dispel some of the myths out there that we have two overlapping programs where we've tried to really harmonize these two, CAS-GEM and Sigma, that are still both in the water code and required, but now it's not duplicative. They all come into one centralized database. So next slide, please. So how that happens, just want to highlight again sort of the data flow of this. So as groundwater data is sent in or submitted from the hundreds of current CAS-GEM monitoring entities that are still monitoring, even that once Sigma passed, to the hundreds of GSAs, many of you on this call and others and Sigma, to other state agencies that are now requiring some groundwater elevations to be submitted, and other federal agencies. So there's a lot of different ways data is submitted in to different state portals, but we're trying to streamline how that happens. So if you could click one more time. So we're trying to centralize it in as few of databases as possible. And then next click, please. Then it really transitions from data submittal to then how people can get access to the data that we have, and it's in centralized location, which the California Natural Resource Agency Open Data Portal is that central clearinghouse that all these different forms of groundwater elevations, in this case, and stations go into one spot, so you can access it there. And then we have these downstream applications that provide provide access in a certain context. So we have Bulletin 118, or California's groundwater basin, or California's groundwater document that uses this information. We have California's Groundwater Live, which has real-time, up-to-date status or information on groundwater levels. And we also have the Sigma Data Viewer, which is a more technical map application, interactive map, where you can overlay a whole bunch of different layers. But all those different sources go back to the same authoritative database, so that as soon as new information comes in each day, that is automatically updated in all these downstream applications. And you can connect your own local data management system to this open data portal, so you have the latest information as well. And we've seen a number of GSAs do that over the years. So next click, please. So a little bit of where we're headed in CAS-GEM. There was a big transition when GSAs came to be, where they were CAS-GEM entities and they went to groundwater sustainability agencies, but we were able to transition that. So all these red or orange dots are all the Sigma monitoring wells, and all the blue dots are the CASGEM wells. And we, again, all this is in one centralized database. And so next slide, please. So where we're headed next is there are a lot of dots on that map. However, we know that some of those dots or monitoring wells are only measured once a year, twice a year. And so we are working with these new resources we have to be keeping what we have going, maintaining and enhancing our statewide groundwater monitoring network. But we're going to be shifting and focusing CASGEM at least on going out to the low and very low basins, or even in non-basin areas in certain circumstances, to try and get more monitoring going in those areas now that the Sigma basins have that really comprehensive monitoring network and plan through the groundwater sustainability plans. We also are going to be enhancing our DWR monitored wells. So we have new resources in all 4 of our regional offices that are going to be looking to be enhancing their DWR monitored networks. So increasing the number of sites that are monitored, but also with existing sites, trying to increase the frequency by either installing data loggers or telemetry setups so we can get more real-time or operational groundwater data and make that publicly available. And while we're doing this, we're going to be improving our data standards and interoperability of the data between these different data collection sources. So we'll be sharing those standard operating procedures and data standards. So if you would want to use them, you can do that as well. So next click, please. So just wrapping up, a couple other things that we're working on, and this is going to be more pilot efforts where we know we have robust monitoring around groundwater sustainability agencies, CASGEM monitoring entities, and we're really going to be trying to build more of a community monitoring presence and working with NGOs, community members, well owners themselves to try and raise awareness of why monitoring groundwater is so important, and then providing or building capacity or equipment to do that. And then once that data is collected, where there's interest and availability, that information can come back into our centralized statewide database so that we can all use it to inform management. So again, that connects to, as Keith mentioned at the top, some of the Senate Bill 552 and drought resiliency work, some of the state boards SAFER work, and then we're also connecting with our USGS colleagues and their National Groundwater Monitoring Network. So it's an exciting time that we're trying to be building more monitoring across the state at different levels, from GSAs to DWR to CASGEM monitoring entities, and this new community monitoring, which will be done at sort of pilot projects across the state. So if you have ideas or interest in creating a pilot in your area, please reach out. We are actively looking for where we could go and test out this community monitoring type of situation. So please let us know if there's interest there. And I think that's my last slide, and just wanted to leave you with these links again. And again, please reach out as you have questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben and Stephen. I really appreciate you providing those updates. If there's any additional questions or you have any input on this topic, as Stephen mentioned, please reach out to us, or you can provide feedback via the survey, the event survey that's going to be distributed at the end today. So now we're going to be moving into panel presentations. This is like a segment that we always get a lot of positive feedback on. And one that is especially beneficial to, I think, all of our participants, just because it's an opportunity where our GSAs are really going to be connecting with all of us directly. And so today we have representatives from 4 GSAs, and they'll be walking us through the various well management approaches that they are pursuing to enhance local basin understanding and to leverage local coordination. Next slide, please. So today, each panelist will provide, a brief, roughly 10 to 15 minute presentation. Then we're going to hold a question and answer session at the end of all of the presentations. But as we're moving through the presentations, please feel free to use the question and answer feature in Zoom. It's at the bottom of your screen. It's next to the chat feature. But you can post your questions now, as they're fresh in your mind. But also don't forget to include which panelist their question is directed to. And then as you're moving along, if you want to track what other people are asking, and if it's similar to the question that you want to ask, you can do what's called upvoting, and we're going to use that feature to confirm which questions we're going to ask the panelists as we move forward. All right, next slide, please. So here's a list of our panelists. This is in the order of appearance for today. So we've got Jameson Crosby, the Natural Resources Conservation Manager for the County of Napa GSA. We have Stephanie Ann Magnuson, who's the Director of Water Resources, the County of Madera GSA, Matt Hurley, the Plan Manager for the McMullen Area GSA, and Marcus Trotta, the Plan Manager for Sonoma County GSAs. So we'll go ahead and we'll kick it off with Jameson first. So take it away, Jameson.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, everybody. And thank you to Keith and Amelia and DWR staff for inviting me to present this morning. Thank you for the introduction. I won't say that again. I am staff to the Napa County Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Next slide, please. And the next one. Thank you. So things I'm going to discuss today, I'm going to give you a little orientation of Napa County and our subbasin, talk to you about the well inventory process we embarked on and thankfully completed, a response to the governor's executive order and changes to our well permitting procedures, with special focus on a change to our water allocation for new and replacement wells. And then I will finish up with a little discussion of Napa County's approach to SB 552. Next slide, please. So in Napa County, we have one high priority subbasin and one groundwater sustainability agency. I have to tell you, my admiration is to those of you who manage multiple subbasins in the same county. My hat is off to you. Our GSA consists of our 5-member county board of supervisors. It's a relatively small subbasin, particularly probably in comparison with those of some of the other folks on this webinar. That blue section there is the portion of the county that is our subbasin. It overlies 4 cities and 1 town. That's Napa, Yountville, Calistoga, and St. Helena. And we have 1 more city in the county, and that's American Canyon, but it is south and outside the subbasin boundary. Our sustainable yield, is a range between 13 to 17,000 acre feet per year, but we've just kind of landed on a figure of 15,000. It's an alluvial basin and a very responsive basin, which can be a good and a bad thing. So when it rains, we recharge fairly readily, and when it doesn't, we feel it quickly. And we're very happy to have an approved GSP from DWR. Next slide, please. So a little cap of the water use in the Napa Valley subbasin. On the pie chart on the left, you see from the years 2005 to about 2014, our average pumping out of the basin totaled about 15,000 acre feet per year, so right at our sustainable yield. In the last 8 years, however, that's gone up pretty significantly, so we're pumping on average a little more than 18,000 acre feet per year. But the relative proportion between the different water uses has remained fairly steady. So agriculture is using about 75% of the water pumped from the subbasin. Rural residential is the next largest category with about 18, then wineries, and a very small percentage for municipal uses. Next slide, please. This slide really presents the same data, but just in a different way. But I thought it was a little more instructive to show, that red line there, our sustainable yield. For many years, we were, tracking above, below, but mostly in line with that sustainable yield. And in the last 8 years have made an excursion from that. Again, the relative proportion of uses, particularly among the other categories, the rural residential, wineries, and municipal has remained fairly constant, but it is the ag uses which have really tracked upwards and downwards, and largely due to drought. That's the reason for the increase in latter years. Next slide, please. So we've been talking a lot about wells. How many wells are there? That's the first question one might ask themselves. And it seems to me that it's very tricky to answer the question, and the answer probably largely depends on who is asking and what degree of accuracy do you need to have in quantifying that number. In Napa's case, we decided for a lot of reasons, we needed to have a pretty accurate number. So our GIS staff embarked on a really rather exhaustive exercise over about a year and a half to quantify them. So in our entire county, we have about 9,645 wells. About 3,882 of those are in the groundwater subbasin. The kind of process they use that I'm recapping for them, and I may not characterize it, give them enough credit, frankly, but they, of course, queried DWR's well completion records database and then compared that with our own county permit database to kind of ascertain, what wells exist. They removed any kind of duplicate records, and then they embarked on, okay, we don't want to know just what exists, but where are they? And let's try to answer that with as much accuracy as we can. So of the figures presented in this table here, about 90% of those were located to their exact parcel. And in some cases to, I won't say exactly, but very close to where it is on the parcel. And that using aerial photos and other records. The other 10% of the total were only located to their parcel centroid. But of course, that's not all. You might also ask yourself, what about the other wells that for which there is not evidence to support the existence of a well completion report or a permit? Certainly, there were a lot of wells drilled in the years before permits were required. So our staff also did an exercise to determine how many inferred wells we had, which are essentially those wells whose existence we can't prove, but we can infer based on a land use that would indicate water use. So if the parcel had a vineyard or a single family home, but no connection to any other municipal water system, then we have a pretty high degree of confidence that there is a well there. So if you add those in, we've got another 3,000 odd wells. Next slide, please. So this is a map. It's not very large on your screen, but the point is just meant to show you kind of overall the distribution of the wells throughout the county. The bright blue dots are the wells that we were able to locate with parcel level accuracy. The red dots, which are a little harder to see, are the ones who are located to their section centroid. And the black dots, which you almost certainly can't see, are the ones that are inferred. Next slide. So the executive order N722 came out in March of 22. Napa County's response to the EO was tricky. It was challenging. I probably don't need to repeat, but I'll just say that the executive order required agencies to review permits for new and replacement wells to determine that they were consistent with their GSP and won't decrease the likelihood of achieving sustainability, that they don't cause interference with other nearby wells, and that they don't cause subsidence. So the first challenge for us was really just balancing a lot of what appeared to be competing mandates, that everything from CEQA to our own county drought emergency, balancing public trust doctrine, and also a procedure, for lack of a better word, that we call our water availability analysis. So it was kind of tricky getting those things to adapt to each other and fit together. It was kind of like splicing things that don't fit, but we did our best and we came up with what I think is a pretty good process. So the next challenge was just incorporating the EO requirements into our existing permit workflows, and particularly trying to keep the permitting function in our environmental health division, where it has been for, I think, since inception. So to do that, we thought, oh, well, what tricky process can't be fixed by a flow chart? So I'm add these mostly just for kind of the comedy of a flow chart. We had two that we thought were perfectly clear, but apparently the public didn't feel that way. So anyway, we scrapped them. They hit the cutting room floor. Next slide. Our response to the EO was largely built around this thing, as I mentioned, the Water Availability Analysis, or WAA. It was a process we put in place some years ago, and I think has really served us well. It came about in 2015, largely to satisfy the secret requirement that we analyze projects to determine if it would substantially deplete groundwater supplies or interfere with recharge. And it requires any discretionary project that may use groundwater or increase groundwater to perform a water availability analysis. And the purpose is to provide guidance both to applicants and staff about how to analyze their project. So after much internal discussion, we came to the conclusion that if applicants continue to follow that WAA, along with applying a reduced water use criterion, that we would be in compliance with EO. And I guess I can credit my predecessors and a history of really groundwater protection for some years now was really a benefit for us in trying to implement the EO, and I'd say gave us maybe just made it a little bit smoother than it might have been otherwise. So the way it works, if you are applying for a new or replacement permit within the subbasin itself, you're required to, you can only pull a maximum of 0.3 acre-feet per acre, and your well must be at least 1,500 feet from a stream and at least 500 feet from other wells. That doesn't mean, if your proposed well is closer than that, it doesn't mean we won't issue the permit. It just means you have to do do some additional analysis. And then outside the subbasin, it's the same, except the water use criteria is defined as the parcel's specific recharge. Next slide, please. So instead of the flow charts, we think it's a little, at least for us, a little bit more clearly presented in a tabular format. So again, if you're inside the subbasin, you can use 0.3. If you cannot, if you are less than 500 feet to a neighboring well, you have to perform what we call a tier 2 analysis. And if you are less than 1,500 feet to a significant stream, you have to perform a tier 3 analysis to demonstrate that there's no significant and unreasonable drawdown. Next slide, please. SB 552. Again, I think we're all pretty familiar, but just to recap, it required counties to establish a drought task force by January 1st of 2022, and then develop a plan with short and long-term mitigation measures to respond to the potential and the eventuality of dry domestic wells. Next slide. So Napa County formed our drought task force in December of 2021. Had our first meeting in April of the following year, and we've met more or less quarterly thereafter. We tried to be a little faster and more efficient by repurposing an existing committee, which we call our WIC, the Watershed Information and Conservation Council, mostly because the WIC's mission was really in line with what we needed to do, the same as the drought task force, so it seemed to work. The first task out of the gate was performing our risk assessment, which was mostly done by my colleague, Brendan McGovern. If you're interested in how he did that, he made a presentation to DWR's webinar on water shortage vulnerability back in February of this year. I'm pretty sure that's on DWR's website somewhere, so if you'd like to see his approach, please take a look. Next slide. So we immediately publicized DWR's dry well reporting tool on our website, but really there have only been about 13 reports of dry wells since 2014, and all of those were either individual domestic wells or household/irrigation combination wells. But I also recognize that it doesn't matter, we can put it on our website, on your website, and try to publicize it, but of course most people probably don't know it exists. So this is certainly an underrepresentation of the problem, and with climate change, it's probably a fair certainty that the situation will only worsen over time. But nevertheless, it's our goal to make our plan and the actions in our plan really proportionate to the scale and magnitude of the problem that we have. In our meeting just last month, actually, end of last month, our drought task force finally got into the meat of discussing those short and long-term mitigation actions. So that was great. I think we made great progress, and hope to finish our plan actually maybe middle of this year. Next slide. So I know DWR recognizes the SB 552 is a heavy lift, and we are grateful that they have provided a lot of resources to all of us to help implement it. They have a couple different kinds of technical assistance. I'm told our facilitators will pop the links to all these up in the chat, but there's a sharing portal that will be coming just in a couple weeks. DWR convened a group of stakeholder counties to develop a DRP guidebook to help people write their own plans, and they have a vulnerability explorer tool on their website. And in addition to that, they provide some planning assistance in the form of either a non-competitive grant of up to $125,000 or direct technical assistance. There is no match requirement for the grant. It's really kind of a reimbursement-based process. And Napa was fortunate enough to, well, we applied for the direct technical assistance, and we're very fortunate to receive it. I have to say it was a really easy process. We submitted an application, which was quite succinct in late April, and by end of June, early July, we had a contract with Stantec to assist with our task force and also help us write our drought response plan. So all in all, it was a very easy process, and I would encourage anybody to investigate if you haven't already. Next slide. Just a little mention of SGMA and SB 552 alignment. This is a really handy and fairly short document on DWR's website. Just paraphrasing, it attempts to identify the opportunities to align and coordinate counties and GSA responsibilities for SB 552 and SGMA. So I would encourage you, again, all of you, to read that. It seems to me, ideally, we would take action, any actions we would take to comply with one of those should really only validate and reinforce our actions to comply with the other. So take a look at it if you haven't already. And then lastly, parting thought, this is a mantra we kind of try to repeat in every public venue we can, in our GSA and other meetings. Whether in drought or deluge, make water conservation a Napa way of life, and probably goes for all of us. That's all my slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Jameson. And you know, we're going to have questions at the end of all of the panel members speaking. So we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephanie from Madera County. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you, Keith. Stephanie Agneson. I'm the Director of Water and Natural Resources for Madera County and for the County Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Next slide, please. And one more, please. Thank you. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of our subbasins with a focus on Chowchilla. I'll talk through our Prop 68 planning grant, which allowed us to create a domestic well inventory, as well as fund some additional monitoring wells and begin a domestic well mitigation program. And really, overall, this presentation seeks to explain how complicated the question is. How many domestic wells are there really? Next slide, please. Thank you. So, like many other regions, much of the county is actually in the foothills. However, this map focuses on the valley floor, and you can see how many different groundwater sustainability agencies there are. Those are all the ones that are different colors. There are 7 going on 8 in the Madera subbasin, 4 in the Chowchilla subbasin, and 3 within the county boundaries in the Delta Mendota subbasin. The land that is in the white color that is not associated with an irrigation or water district that formed a GSA is the land that the county itself is responsible for. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk you through a little basin setting. This couple of slides have been described as a James Michener novel, which was probably not a compliment, so I may pick up the pace a little bit. James Michener, of course, is in the beginning and all the generational issues. So this is a sample hydrograph, and it shows that without projects and management actions, we would see steadily declining groundwater levels into the future. And that's all the green that is modeling what would happen without actions, without Sigma. Next slide, please. So what does that look like in the Chowchilla subbasin in terms of a water budget? Well, in terms of groundwater extraction, approximately 308,000 acre feet are being extracted. And then in terms of groundwater recharge, what's happening naturally through infiltration, rainfall, seepage on waterways and canals is around 200,000. So you can see there's this gap or shortage of about 100,000 acre feet on average per year. Next slide, please. So how do you make up a gap of that size? Well, we have aggressive recharge planned, and that is bringing up the groundwater recharge by about 50,000 acre feet. And then that is coupled with what I would call aggressive demand reduction as well, primarily at this time in the county GSA, which is responsible for those white areas. Next slide, please. What does our demand management look like? It is an allocation that was developed in 2018 and 19 by an advisory committee of farmers and residents. It is focused on irrigated agriculture within the county GSA jurisdiction. And it's worth saying that in the Chowchilla subbasin, 97% of the water demand is from ag. So there is a focus on irrigated ag. It's not demonizing ag, it's just where the water use is. In the Madera subbasin, it's about a 93% water demand from irrigated ag. So the allocation itself is a step function in terms of decrease over time. There is a gentler slope at the beginning and then a faster ramp down over time. The advisory committee's advice was that everyone needed some time to get their legs under them and understand how this would work, but we're all willing to commit to demand management as part of the solution. The demand management program was adopted for the 5-year period by the board and actually won an award from the California State Association of Counties last year. We think that is due to the outreach, which was pretty massive, as well as an understanding of how difficult this work really is. Next slide, please. So with the combination of aggressive recharge and demand management through an allocation, as well as some land repurposing, you can see the hydrograph showing well levels beginning to stabilize. So that is our basin setting. Let's shift now to the domestic well inventory. So we were able to harness Prop 68 planning funds for this. In the Chowchilla subbasin, the grant was $500,000 and $400,000 in the Madera subbasin. All of the GSPs, both the Chowchilla GSP as well as the Madera joint GSP, initially included an outlined domestic well mitigation program. So these discussions have been ongoing since 2018. The idea was that we knew demand management would be necessary, and during that time, beneficial users of drinking water would need to have some support. So we also know that there is a data gap in terms of how many wells there are, and there is a need to improve our monitoring well network. So the grant funded a domestic well inventory, as well as 3 monitoring wells in the Chowchilla subbasin. And it also provided the basis for design of the domestic well inventory program. I'm sorry, domestic well mitigation program. Thank you. So we contracted with a consultant, Ludorf and Scalmanini Consulting Engineers, and they conducted the domestic well inventory and have produced this table. It's similar to some of what you saw Ben sharing in terms of identifying data sources and how they can be used. So I'll walk through this. The DWR well completion report database is probably the best place to get data on wells. It goes back the earliest. There's data since the early 1900s. It does not include, and in fact, no data sources include whether the well is active or not. In terms of location, sometimes there is precise information and sometimes it's limited to the middle of a section. The best part, of course, with the DWR well completion database is you get the construction information that tells you the depth of the well and how it is screened. So this is really an excellent source. The next source is the county well permit database. And just so it's absolutely clear, the well permit is the first step in the process where you're applying for a permit, talking through what you might do. And then the well completion report is the final product, right? That's what you did. So they're not really the same. So within Madera County, our records go to 1990. And in Chowchilla subbasin, there's a bit of Merced County. So we've listed Merced there as well, records going to 1998. Again, no well status information, and we are organized, of course, by the assessor's parcel number, sometimes by the address. But the county well permit database is not going to tell you really any information about construction because they're applying for a permit before it's constructed. We then had 2 other sources of data that we looked at in the domestic well inventory. We obviously have our assessor's parcel number, and what Jameson was calling inferred wells could be determined from this. So, for example, if you know there is a home, most likely it has a source of water. And if we remove from the data everyone who's being served by a city, a county maintenance district, a water company, you will have a set of people who will have no other source other than a well. Again, the location is not precise. Parcels vary in size pretty greatly. So from 0.2 acres to a few thousand acres. So just by the APN, that's not necessarily useful in terms of the exact well location. And then lastly, we also have information from the last census, and we know where households are. So one could also infer wells from there. So as all of the speakers have said, there is really no perfect source for all of what you want to exist, but you can help create or make the existing sources better. Next slide, please. One thing that we did is compare the well completion reports to the county permits. And remember, I said the permit is the first step and the well completion report is the last step, but hopefully for domestic well users, that would capture everything. And one thing you see is that, gosh, those are not the same height, those bars. So sometimes there are a lot of well permits, but not a lot of well completion reports. And maybe they were done the next year and they're just not tracked in the same way. And then other times there are a lot of well completion reports, but not as many well permits. Next slide, please. So I'll walk you through a little bit of the methodology for how we determined or estimated domestic wells. I'll use the Chowchilla subbasin, but Madera tracks in a similar fashion. So in terms of well completion reports, we know under a 50-year period, there's about 500 well completion reports that are filed with DWR, much bigger number in the Madera subbasin. So that's 50 years of data, and we chose that because that's pretty much the oldest we have heard locally of a well being is this 50-year period. So ideally, we could compare that to well permits, but the county's data set is for a much shorter period of time. So we looked at well completion reports for 1990 to 2020, which is 374. And then for the same time period with the county. So we're comparing sort of apples to apples-ish, maybe not exactly the same apple, but 374 well completion reports and same time period, 439 permits pulled for wells. The factor that explains the relationship between those two is about 1.2 if you took 439 and divided by 374. Interestingly, that same factor existed in the Madera subbasin. So we started to think maybe this could work. We could scale up. And that 1.2 is then multiplied by the well completion reports for the 50-year period. That's 1.2 times 500 to get about 600 domestic wells in the Chowchilla subbasin. So then we went and compared that to our assessor data and census data, and you see a difference here. When you do the comparison in Chowchilla, you get a number that increases significantly from 600 to 900. In Madera, it is about the same number. So I think it suggests a potential methodology for determining how many domestic wells there are. Probably could be refined if the methodology was used in more subbasins as well. Next slide, please. So that's how we determined the wells and their locations. And then we mapped where they are, and the clusters of domestic wells where the red circles are became the place where we placed monitoring wells. Next slide. And this is my last one. And so all of this work in terms of determining how many wells and improving our monitoring well network led to the creation of a domestic well mitigation program in the Chowchilla subbasin. This is currently administered by Chowchilla Water District. We are very grateful for their leadership with this. There's a GSP advisory committee that advises on the program. We are continuing to learn how to do this, and it's consistent with advice in the guidance document from the NGOs. So that concludes my presentation, and I know we're taking questions in a separate way later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. All right, on to Matt.
Hey, me. There I go. Can you find me? Am I up? There I go.
I can, yep, I
I'll
can hear you.
wave. I'll wave. There I am.
There we go.
I recognize that guy. Top of the morning to you all. It's a fine groundwater management morning today. I'm happy to be with the 118 or so participants today to talk about my favorite topic, which is the McMullen Area Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Kind of a small unit as compared to the two county approaches. The small map that's shown there kind of gives you an idea of where we started from. I think before I even comment on that map, I think it's important to know exactly what there is about McMullen that kind of makes it unique. And I think it makes it one of those that if we can do it, then everybody else can do it type places. In 1920, the entirety of that, what we call the little dragon, you see there, you can start to see a dragon, then you can't unsee it. But anyway, this little dragon was essentially a swamp. It was the confluence at the top up there. You'll see the San Joaquin River. And on the side, of the western side, is actually the North Fork of the Kings River. So we're adjacent to two fantastic watercourses, and they contributed to a big area called the Fresno Slough that essentially comprised most of what is now McMullen area groundwater. But in 1920, there was plenty of water. In 2023, there's not as much water as there used to be. And so it became necessary, of course, as part of SGMA, to create a GSA. Everybody else in the subbasin, which is the King subbasin, and as a side note, yes, we're very proud that we passed the audition and made it over the hump to become an approved subbasin for our GSPs. But the rest of the subbasin is essentially water districts managing their areas and all of their surface water and their groundwater together to effectively a sort of a balanced condition. And what the subbasin has decided is that, you know, the area that probably must be causing what we estimate to be about 120,000 acre feet of annual overdraft in the subbasin. Obviously, if there's an area that never was managed and nobody ever managed the groundwater there and nobody really ever took care of it, then it must be mainly responsible for the overdraft. And so in our subbasin, which has 7 GSAs, us being one of them, the subbasin decided that our 120,000 acre feet of overdraft should be assigned to the area that they think most likely caused it, which is McMullen. And so here we are, an entirely, I mean entirely groundwater-based GSA, no surface water, despite the fact that 2 rivers go down adjacent to us. And the subbasin has, in its wisdom, decided that McMullen should take care of 3/4 of the 120,000 acre feet of overdraft. That's 90,000 acre feet on annual average. And that's how we're going to get to sustainability in the King subbasin. But, you know, Matt, wait a minute. How is that possible that an area that doesn't have any surface water and has relied entirely on groundwater for its entire existence is going to be the solution for at least 3/4 of the overdraft in the King subbasin? That might be a challenge that even SGMA doesn't seem to suit. But we took a quick look at it. We went straight out to our landowners, and I'm leading up to this very important point with our landowners, and we said to them, folks, we've got a problem here. We've been asked to retire 3/4 of the overdraft in the King subbasin, and we have no water. Now, about a week after SGMA was passed, there was a public television show, and one of the adjacent water district's manager, long retired since then, said really the solution to the King subbasin is to have McMullen retire half of its land. Well, McMullen's 120,000 acres, 95% to 100% agriculture, productive agriculture, and very little room other than that to do anything except continue to do agriculture. So let's think. Let's just retire 60,000 acres out of a productive 120,000 acre area. Will that have any economic impacts? Maybe, maybe not. Yes. Will that have any impacts on the people out there? Yes. Will that have any effect on the subbasin? Maybe. So that's not one that we were happy to think about, but that's where we started. My board was organized, just like everybody else's GSA boards were organized, and we started off with the very negative description that I've given you so far. But this particular person, this GSA manager, believes wholeheartedly in SGMA. I advocate for it strongly. I think it's the solution to a big problem that if we don't fix, we'll have big problems in the future. And so that's what we started with. And so I talked to my board about things that they needed to do. And, you know, as probably some of you had the same situation, they told me, "It's fine, Matt, let's get this solved. But one, don't talk to us about meters. We don't want to use the word meter ever again, if that's okay. And, you know, giving up information from our landowners, I don't think that's a very good idea." So I just finally said, well, maybe I'm not the right guy for the job here, because my basic tenet in SGMA, and perhaps it's what I've heard so far, even from the state, is that you cannot manage what you cannot measure. And so therefore, I'm going to ask you as a board to adopt policies which move our landowners, our most important resource, our landowner, to a position where we need to know where every single hole in the ground is within this GSA, and we need to put a meter on every one of those holes that's producing water. And that was that was like, okay, them's fighting words. But we went about developing policies with that board. Of course, all board policies are where everything starts. I hope the same is for your GSAs. We educated our board. We educated members of the public who those board members relied on. And eventually we began to adopt a fairly robust set of policies. And of course, from policy is where all implementation should come. So I'm going to be more specific with you today. And for the topic of the day about well measurement and mitigation, et cetera, I'm going to focus on what our well policy ended up being. The actual policy itself was that by January 31st of 2025, every single production well within McMullen will have a meter on. Well, that's a pretty far leap from 2017 to 2020 when we passed that. And how did we get there? We spent hours and hours and hours with our landowners, with our public. We asked them about things. We educated about well management. We educated them about Sigma. We made sure that they knew as much as we could convince them about Sigma and its seriousness and how we had to be serious if we wanted to survive this very, very detailed process. And so we passed that policy, and we passed other policies relative to well construction in the future, et cetera, and you know, the need for these types of things within our GSA. And then from that policy, we come to our implementing rules and regulations. And of course, rules and regulations, ordinances, whatever you want to call them, are where the rubber meets the road. It's where you ask your landowners, your constituents, your customers to get behind you and follow us, get behind us and follow us to the promised land, which is sustainability under Sigma. And so we passed a set of rules and regulations about groundwater metering, measurement, monitoring, and construction. And those policies never come to light unless the board has reviewed them in detail with staff, and we've come up with an administrative draft that we believe is defensible and will be understood by our members. That's step number one, administrative draft. Step number two is the board taking a look at it. Clearly, step number three is the stakeholder review. Now, in our GSA, we send everything out. So as soon as the board says, yes, daylight it, we send it out. We put it on our website. We send it out to our interested parties list. We have a technical advisory committee meeting and take a look at it. We have a stakeholder committee that immediately takes a look at it, and we gather feedback. And we make sure that every single landowner, every single interested party has a chance to tell us either we're full of malarkey or this looks okay, we can live with this. And so it does not come back to the board until we've exhausted all of the inputs. That includes our county, as we've indicated here, I've indicated. The county is really not specifically involved, or the county's involved in all of our GSA. So the county comments as well to make sure we've got that covered. And then when we feel like we've got our regulations and rules in good stead, we bring it back to the board and we adopt that policy. So policy gets adopted, regulation gets adopted, and now the people who have to actually do the implementation, the landowners, are they going to buy in? Are they going to be cooperative? Are they going to believe that what we've done here is important for their future? Next slide, please. So what we do, we don't stop there. We don't stop with regulation. In fact, this is legitimately, this is probably one of two regulations we've passed that are actually, true regulations for our landowners. The rest of it is a request from our landowners for cooperation, coordination, collaboration, rather than regulation. But the first thing that we did under our new regulations was said, look, in accordance with Crazy Matt's theory that you need to know where every hole in the ground is within the GSA, first and foremost, we need a well registration program. Okay, Crazy Matt, you're going to go out and do what? You've heard what some other folks have done. They went to the best available information. They began to do gathering of that information, cross-comparing, trying to come up with reasonable estimates, et cetera. What did MAGSA do? We decided to ask our landowners, where's your well? And so, sounds as crazy as it is, we came up with a well registration program. Board adopted the well registration requirement in November 1st of 2021. And it wasn't a 2-year process. It wasn't a 1-year process. We sent out word to our landowners that we would like for them to voluntarily submit to us information on a sheet that we asked them to fill out, which included their name, address, local point of contact, geolocations of their well, APN number of their well, length of time they believe they've been operating that well, whether it was active, inactive, whether it was abandoned, lots and lots of, very good information. I don't know what just happened. My computer just made me little. Huh. Okay. Let me see if I can shrink myself here.
Yeah, it looks like we lost the presentation on the.
Well, that's
on the
okay.
screen.
I can keep talking.
We'll get it
I
added.
can tell you what we did.
There we go.
Okay, that's what happened. At least it wasn't anybody trying to hack us. I won't even go there. DWR. Anyway, the deal was, let's have these guys register their wells voluntarily by January 1st of 2022, a mere 60 days after we passed the regulation. The other day I was talking to the Water Education Foundation, and I asked for a show of hands, which I can't necessarily do here, but I have an idea the results would be the same. It's kind of like voter turnout in elections, right? I asked, what folks thought the actual percentage chance that landowners in a groundwater only district that were threatened with 50% of their land being retired when SGMA first passed, how willing were they going to be to give the current ownership or management of the problem, about their particular wells? And most everybody said, yeah, maybe 20, 25%. Well, I'm happy to say that despite the fact that we had Thanksgiving, a lot like where we are right now today, despite the fact that we had Thanksgiving, and despite the fact that we had Christmas and New Year's intervening, and probably a lot of mail making its way onto people's desks that wasn't looked at during that time, we estimated, this is one of the few times that we estimated that we got a 70% response by January 1st. And that came as a result on the left-hand column there. I don't have to read it to you, but we went out and we really, suggested in a series of communications with our landowners why this registration was very important and why it was a very, very critical first step in beginning to manage groundwater within McMullen. We identified the benefits and barriers. We sold the benefits. We answered their questions about the barriers. We definitely, once we got feedback from them, decided to, listen to what they had to say and address their concerns. We sent out letters, we sent out postcards, we sent out, a robust email campaign, and we actually had a web page on our web page, a junior web page to our website that allowed for people, even if they wanted to, rather than, spend a stamp to mail it back to us, to go ahead and register their wells on a form that we made available electronically on the website. So, next slide, please. So we did try to communicate. And we do try to communicate, and we continuously communicate with our landowners on every topic. So this is just indicative of how we approach life within McMullen. We include our landowners right down to the individual landowner. When they come in and tell us we need to have our head adjusted and they tell us why, we always try to note what their thoughts are. But anyway, here we go. We asked to be, registered by January 1st with a printed form, with an online form. And we sent out the letters, we sent out the hard copy registration. Go ahead and move the slide. And then like I said, we came up with, we roughly estimated to be about 70% coverage. And that's when we stepped in and said, okay, most regulators wouldn't give you additional time. They would figure out a way to hit you over the head. But we sent out a mailer that said to them, okay, we know it was Thanksgiving, we know it was Christmas. But we're so thrilled with the fact that 70% of our estimated wells have been registered. We're going to thank you for that by asking for an additional 60-day period to see if we can finish this off. Next slide, please. So there's the result. By March of 2022, 120 days after we ask our landowners to register their wells, we believe that we were in excess of 90%. Since that time, we've verified the number to be closer to 97% registered wells. Registration, of course, only the first step in what we're looking for here, which is the ability to quantitatively determine just exactly how much groundwater is being extracted from McMullen, something that was never kept, no records were ever kept of, and no intention to ever keep any records was the setup for. So this particular registration turned out to be a really, really, positive thing. And it was the first step towards, what's my next thing? Metering. We began to develop an incentive program for metering. We tried to come up with some grant money. We tried 3 times and failed to come up with grant money. So we were sort of looking at, what are we going to do now? How are we going to encourage everybody to go out and buy meters? It's not a cheap investment to do that. It is one-timer, but it is not a cheap investment. Our policy in the beginning had already mandated that we have electromagnetic meters, plus or minus 1% to 2% variability on accuracy, and to be installed by January 1st of 2025. So we tried another time, and lo and behold, and thankfully, actually, it worked out to our advantage because the Bureau of Reclamation originally had a $2 million limit on their Water Smart grants, and we were able to get into the next new category, and we were able to receive a $2.8 million grant, largely, I think, as a result of the success on our registration of our wells, but one which was on the WEEGE program, the Water and Energy Efficiency Grant Program, that's intended to try to do what we can to become max efficient before we start to do demand management. And we've got that now. We're just about to implement a metering program where we're hoping that we'll cover just about 50% of the cost of putting a meter on every single active well within McMullen. That will greatly enhance our ability to manage our groundwater situation, and it will greatly enhance our ability to participate with the subbasin in coming to a sustainability number that is realistic. Some of the other stuff that we've done on a policy front, as you can see there, we've continued to do well construction oversight under the executive order. That was a godsend. I hope it stays around for a while. Every single application for a new well permit in Fresno County is filtered out by GSA and is sent out to a GSA for review and approval. They can't be issued without a GSA approval. It's a tremendous tool. We take a look at it. In addition to the registration that I talked about in the metering, we also required a moratorium to exist on new well construction so that we don't go through the Corcoran clay. That's our best weapon, as we believe, to combat subsidence. And so we've adopted a moratorium on going through the clay. And for our well mitigation program, we've adopted a part of that policy, which says to anybody who wants to dig a new domestic or ag well for that matter, that unless they dig a well to a depth which is below our minimum threshold under our sustainable management criteria, that they will not be eligible for future mitigation. So we're trying to head it off the past now. We're trying to deal with past problems, but we'll make it to the end. Anyway, those are the things that we've done. That's what we're doing going forward. But the last thought on there is the most important thing is communicate consistently from the beginning. Honestly, we don't sugarcoat anything, and we ask our landowners to be our partners and to coordinate, cooperate, collaborate, and hopefully, if that happens, we'll have a collective vision for sustainability that'll work, and we won't have to regulate. So with that, I'll end it, and I'll answer questions later.
Thanks, Matt. All right, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Marcus.
Okay, thank you, Keith, and good morning, everybody. Happy to be here. I'm going to apologize in advance for any background noise that may occur. They're working on our HVAC system here at the office today, but hopefully I'll be able to get through the presentation before that kicks up again. So, yeah, Marcus Trotta, I'm a principal hydrogeologist with Sonoma Water, and also serve through agreements with the 3 groundwater sustainability agencies as plan manager for 3 GSAs here in Sonoma County. So today, just wanted to give a brief overview of the GSA's kind of basin setting and land and water use features, and then really kind of focus mostly on a tool that was developed as we implemented a groundwater sustainability fee in the 3 basins to interface with groundwater users directly within the basin, the guide tool. And then I'll spend a little time also given an overview of well permitting changes that have occurred in Sonoma County in response to the drought executive order that's already been discussed, as well as changes that were made by the county in response to considerations for public trust resources. Next slide. So the three groundwater sustainability agencies in Sonoma County, you can see are highlight here in the North San Francisco Bay, the Petaluma Valley, Santa Rosa Plain, and Sonoma Valley groundwater basins and subbasins. We have one single GSA in each basin, so a total of 3 GSAs. Each one is made up of GSA eligible agencies in each area: cities, water districts, counties, resource conservation districts. Make up the board of each of the GSAs, and each GSA submitted a single GSP, all of which were approved in January of last year by DWR. Next slide. So just some of the notable kind of metrics and features which within the 3 basins that are related to land and water use. There's a total of about 112,000 parcels across the 3 basins, and those are largely the majority of those parcels are within the cities, the urban areas of the basins. But we also have a large number of rural residential parcels throughout the basins, close to 10,000 across all 3. In addition to a significant percentage of land use, about a total of 34,000 acres of irrigated agriculture, primarily premium wine grapes, but also dairies and other crops and pasture lands that are spread out throughout the 3 basins. And then we have municipal, industrial, and commercial uses within the basin as well. I'll provide a little more information on that on the next slide. And one claim to fame, I guess, for Sonoma County is that the county at large has the highest number of wells per capita in the state. So very, very high percentage of water wells that support many beneficial uses throughout the county, a total of about 40,000 wells in total. Next slide. So groundwater really represents a critical resource throughout Sonoma County, and in particular within the 3 basin. This pie chart on the left shows the approximate average percent of water supplies within those 3 GSA basins. And you can see groundwater represents about 50% on average, a little less than that during wetter years, and a little more than that during drier years, like many areas. Another large source of supply, particularly, that's really focused on the urban areas, the cities and larger water districts, is the Russian River system, which is operated by Sonoma Water and delivers water that's stored and managed in Lake Mendocino and Lake Sonoma, and delivered as imported surface water, essentially, to the 3 groundwater basins that are subject to SGMA. And then there's also some local surface water supplies that are utilized by some landowners, as well as recycled water, which is developed in some areas of the basin and applied as both landscape and irrigation for crops. You can see the groundwater supports a number of different beneficial uses and users within the 3 basins. Rural residential uses represent anywhere between about 15 to 20% of the total groundwater use in the 3 basins. The urban areas, the city residents, and kind of the businesses and commercials can range from 5 to as high as 25%, depending upon the basin and the water year conditions. And agriculture, irrigated agriculture, represents anywhere between 30 to 60% of the groundwater use in the 3 basins, based on our best estimates at the time. Next slide. So as the GSPs were being completed late in 22, all 3 GSAs, or late in 2021, I should say, all 3 GSAs initiated the development of fee studies to explore assessing fees on groundwater users within the 3 basins to fund the kind of the operational costs of the GSAs. So those were really began in earnest as the GSPs were submitted, and involved a lot of community outreach, as Matt pointed out. This is very new. Groundwater management's very new in throughout the state, and new to many of our local groundwater users as well. The fees were adopted in the summer of 2022, and they are calculated based on our estimates of groundwater use in each basin, and the total operational budgets for each of the GSAs, as I'll show a little bit more on the next slide how that's derived. And as you can imagine, this required a lot of outreach and direct communication and information sharing, both to develop the fees as well as implement those fees going forward, which has led to the kind of this interactive tool that we've developed to share the information with groundwater users. And so yeah, I'll just say that if you are looking for ways to engage groundwater users, if you're having trouble reaching them, initiating fee studies and hosting community meetings is a very good way to do that, to get groundwater users' attention, and has been a good way for us to make groundwater users aware of the GSPs and what the GSAs are doing. Next slide. So this slide kind of just highlights one of the main challenges that we had in developing these fee studies. We do, like many basins, have actual metered and reported data for our municipal and public water systems that are used directly to assess fees on those users. But for the vast majority of uses, rural residential, agricultural, commercial uses that are outside of cities, those estimates need to be based on kind of the best available information we have on land use and water use assumptions. So you can see the different types of categories that fall into that category. So we relied on whatever information we had from existing studies and information we obtained from users. We formed working groups of agricultural practitioners to help us understand their water use and how that relates to groundwater extraction. Next slide. So like Matt, all 3 of our GSAs did a lot of outreach throughout this process, both for the fee implementation as well as the guide program in the form of direct mailers, press releases, email blasts. We have GSAs have an interested parties list that's very active, social media. And then, one real key as the fees were actually being rolled out and being, mailed out or showing up on people's property tax bills, one thing that was really helpful was establishing kind of a phone bank at that time with GSA member agency staff to provide timely responses to all of the phone calls and emails that were coming in, so that people felt that knew that there was somebody on the other end that could help explain what the fees were and how they were calculated. And so that was really key. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of the Groundwater User Information Data Exchange or GUIDE program, and having a good acronym is always important. And this was a much improved acronym over the first acronym, which was the Groundwater User Registration Program, or GURP. And so we think that this acronym, which was developed by chair of one of our advisory committees, much improved over that initial version. But so this web interface really provides groundwater users the ability to zoom in and identify their specific parcel and see the information that the GSA has and is using to calculate the fees that are being assessed to them. So it provides information on their particular parcel, the acreage, whether the GSA has information on whether there's a connection to recycled water or other surface water source, or whether a water well is a likely source of water for the parcel, and then shows them the calculated or the estimated water use based on those land use and crop types that are on the property, and shows them what their fee is based on those uses, which is calculated as the total acre foot extracted per year times the sustainability fee, which is currently $40 an acre foot in all three of the basins. It also provides a link to a survey, which allows groundwater users to provide any additional information or corrections to the information that the GSA has, and I'll get into that a little further on following slides. The interface also allows them to show different display different layers, including crop mapping, DWR's crop mapping, which is used to estimate the acreage of irrigated agriculture, for example. Some key takeaways that we learned through this process is to make sure that you've got the ability to interface and provide information and support for groundwater users that really don't have the resources or aren't comfortable utilizing the internet for these types of purposes. And so taking the time to help some of the constituents fill out their surveys, having paper copies for some, was really helpful in allowing the landowners to see exactly kind of how their fee is calculated and provide a good layer of transparency. And next slide. And so to that end, this map shows the number of surveys that have been received to date by the GSA. So these are groundwater users that have gone through the GUIDE system and completed that survey and provided information or had questions on the GSA's groundwater use estimates. And we've already responded to and addressed about 94% of those, and some of those are still ongoing in terms of their review, but no formal or informal appeals have been received by the GSAs to date on those surveys. Just some of the comment survey responses are some of the groundwater users had other sources of supply, which the GSA didn't have records for. So over time, we see that this GUIDE program is being really useful to the GSA in improving its understanding of water use, groundwater use within the basin, and how that's used, how much is used, and where. Next slide. So just going to the drought EO and the GSA's coordination with the county there. Is kind of building on information that Jameson presented on. So just some of the considerations on the GSA side on the process is as we review those well permits that come across our desks are things like the current and projected available sustainable yield within each basin, evaluating sustainable management criteria, particularly for chronic lowering of groundwater levels and depletion of interconnected surface water, considering whether there's any nearby minimum threshold exceedances, and then we will generally make recommendations in some cases on the proposed well design to minimize impacts to nearby shallow wells or interconnected surface water, as well as recommendations for the applicants to share data with the GSA going forward. Next slide. Some of the challenges that the GSAs have are for funding, our review of those permits, messaging to stakeholders and permittees on the new requirements related to the drought executive order, as well as recent changes to related to the public trust doctrine that the counties developed, which I'll share next. And then applying those review standards consistently across all three basins, which each have their own distinct features and varying levels of issues of concern. And then I think like all GSAs and counties, liability concerns continue to be a challenge for the GSAs. So the last topic I'm presenting on is an initiative that the County of Sonoma recently addressed related to the public trust doctrine. And just to provide a little bit of background, back in 2018, California Court of Appeals issued a ruling finding that public trust doctrine applies to groundwater wells that have an adverse impact on navigable waters. This was the Scott River case. In 2021, the County of Sonoma was sued by California Coastkeeper Alliance, sought compliance with the public trust doctrine. And through those negotiations, the county developed a proposed draft well ordinance that had changes in the permitting process to address those public trust resources. The Board of Supervisors heard that draft well ordinance and wasn't prepared to adopt it at the time, and issued a 6-month moratorium at the time on well permits, and directed the county staff to form both policy and technical working groups and return to within 6 months with a revised ordinance. So those working groups met over the course of those 6 months. GSAs participated in both of the policy and technical working groups. And in April of 2023, the Board of Supervisors adopted the revised ordinance and terminated the moratorium. Some of the main components of the ordinance, kind of just the approach to defining the areas that are subject to the public trust review requirements, include identifying, where the resources are more sensitive. And for this, really the county looked at the habitat value of local streams and watersheds, primarily focused on rearing habitat for salmonids in our region, as well as where stresses on those groundwater is more likely to impact streams. So looking at water use and recharge estimates was how that was done. And so they developed a process to kind of prioritize different watersheds and stream corridors in the county that are within this public trust review area. So those are the areas that are shown in light blue for the sub watersheds and the dark blue for the stream corridors that are subject to these new requirements. You can see where those areas overlap with the 3 groundwater sustainability agencies, which are shown in purple. And the chart here shows, kind of countywide how many permits are typically applied for, each year in the respective areas, with the vast majority of those permits being rural residential permits that are primarily non-exempt from these requirements. Next slide. So here's a flow chart for Jameson. So this is just the process that the county has established in determining what level of review is required. If a proposed well is located outside of any of those public trust review areas shown in blue, it's still ministerial. However, there are new water conservation requirements that do apply to all new well permits. In addition, there is a requirement for metering for all new wells that are projected to use more than 2 acre-feet per year. So pretty much any commercial or agricultural irrigation well going forward within the county is required to meter and report. Next, it goes through a process determining whether that well is exempt from the ordinance because of other reasons. And so largely most of the wells that go through the discretionary project are commercial or irrigation wells. And in terms of coordinating with the GSAs, there's really no review required by the GSAs for those ministerial permits unless required by the drought executive order. Discretionary public trust review permits would be referred to the GSA for an opportunity to review. No response is required by the GSAs. And then as the county implements this new well ordinance, there's a lot of areas where we've already started coordination with the county on air because we have a lot of common data gaps and need for improvements to modeling. So I'll just close with some of the ongoing challenges and opportunities for the Sonoma County GSAs. One challenge is related to the fees. There's a significant variation in the fee calculations across the 3 basins because they have very different total groundwater use estimates, and so the fees range from $40 to $140 an acre foot across the 3 basins. So you could have groundwater users paying 3 times as much for groundwater in one basin compared to another. Currently, the county has been contributing funding to equalize the fees across those 3 basins, but that's not something that's guaranteed to continue long term, and is kind of an ongoing challenge, unique challenge for GSAs in lower water use basins that are establishing fees based on groundwater extraction estimates. Also, the uncertainty related to well locations and extraction estimates, that's been a big topic today. And the 3 GSAs have been fortunate to receive SIGMA implementation grants to update our well inventory. So I was really interested to see how that's being done by many of our colleagues here. And we see that our guide program is being a really useful tool that we can use to integrate that well inventory, because one thing that's important to note is that guide interface and guide database that I shared is not necessarily a well inventory. It's more to estimate groundwater use on a parcel specific basis. And then just ongoing funding related to all of the well permitting changes. It's just requiring a lot more coordination between the GSAs and the counties. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Marcus, and thank you everybody for sharing a little bit about what you've done in your respective basins regarding well management. We really appreciate you taking this time today. We're going to move on to the question and answer portion of the panel discussion. We are running a little bit short on time, but that's okay. Like these presentations have been great and really informative, and we really do want to get through your questions as best as we can. And it looks like some of you have already started putting questions in that question and answer, the Q&A feature on Zoom. And so if you have more, please put your question in there, and also don't forget to include which panelists the question's directed towards. And then also, if you see somebody asking a question, that is similar to one you like to ask, please upvote it by clicking the thumbs up button. That'll allow us to really know, which questions we should prioritize. And so what I'll go ahead and do is start looking through those. It seems we got a question from Christina Buck, and it's directed at Jameson. It says, is NAPA's drought plan expected to be complete by mid-2024? Also, were the 3 criteria for the EO straight out of the WAA, or were they developed based on the WAA? And then thank you very much for an informative presentation. So I don't know, Jameson, you want to hop on and respond to that?
Yeah. Yes, we are hoping, cross fingers, to complete our drought plan expected in mid-2024. And were the 3 criteria straight out of the EO? For the most part, yes. The 0.3 acre foot standard was not written into the WAA. And I meant to mention this in my presentation, the derivation of that. Well, no, maybe I did. That comes from the sustainable yield divided by the irrigated acreage. And so that sustainable yield was part of our groundwater sustainability plan. So I guess you'd say it was kind of an implied standard, but it was the EO that kind of made us make that more explicit. But yes, most of it derived from the WAA.
Great, thanks, Jameson. The next question is actually from you, Jameson, but it was upvoted, so other people had the same question, and it's directed at Matt. So it's Matt. How many landowners are in your program area? And I think there was a follow-up question too. Oh yeah, and what incentives and rebates did your program offer? But I think you covered that obviously a little bit, but maybe if you have anything else to add. So Matt,
yeah, in our GSA, we have 120,000 acres. We have about 1,250 parcels. Interestingly enough, we have about half of our GSA is owned by 46 landowners, and the other half is owned by about 350 landowners. So we have a really wide range of interests, wide range of impacts, and interest from our landowners. So we get really good, robust feedback from them. The incentives that we ended up with is approximately a 50% rebate that we're able to offer for the installation of electromagnetic meters with telemetry and 5 years subscription to reporting, all of which is going to happen over the next year up to January of 2025.
Great, thanks, Matt. Let's see. The next question is from Chris Hunley, and it's for Marcus. What surface water use documentation is required for the Sonoma County guide system?
Yeah, that's something that was definitely something that we needed to work through. In general, we're looking for, I think, water use, that's surface water use that's reported to the state board. So we'll use the eRIMS database, and if there's any discrepancy or questions, then we'll work directly with the landowners to resolve that. But it is a challenge because the eRIMS database doesn't necessarily have information on where the groundwater or where the surface water use occurs, or it's not very detailed, and so that has definitely been a specific challenge for us.
Thanks, Marcus. And then actually, there's one more question for you from Michael Selling. And it looks like you're in the process of responding to it, but maybe if you wouldn't mind responding to it verbally. How does the database total of groundwater use, i.e. as assigned per parcel, match up with the modeling and monitoring data? And then what is the approximate disparity?
Yeah, good question. I can't remember the total disparity, but it is something we certainly compared to, because one of the issues was just in messaging, because these are different methodologies to try to estimate something that's unknown, because we did have models that have water budgets that estimated groundwater use, and so there are differences between the totals, primarily in the irrigated agricultural components. But I don't think they were that great, and it was something that we paid attention to, and I want to say they were kind of within 10% or so. But we do feel that the data that we're receiving through this process, through the guide program over the next several years, is something that'll be helpful as we prepare our 5-year GSP evaluations and update our groundwater models going forward, that we think the information will help make our models more accurate.
Great, thanks, Marcus. Let's see. Next question is for Matt. It's from Eric Cataray. What are the top 3? Oh, hold on. It moved. Sorry about that. Uh-oh. Where did that go?
Keith, I can read it to you. It
Thank
got
you.
moved into the answered, and
Oh, I
Matt
see. It was
answered it
answered.
in
Got it.
typing. You want me to read it out loud?
Yeah, go ahead, Allie. Thank you.
What are the top 3 things for GSA managers and staff to consider to have hard conversations with their landowners, board members, and community members to gain their trust and support to achieve sustainability?
I did type an answer to that, but that's what I'm happy to report on. One, going back to that robust outreach, it's education too, but I would suggest to anybody who wants to talk to a landowner or interested party about SGMA, that that person do everything within their power to become an expert on SGMA. SGMA is very complicated, and to give simple answers to SGMA questions is a dangerous place to go. So make sure that you're able to communicate to your listener that you know what you're talking about, and that you're going to follow the law. The second thing is to I think I said to be honest with them. It's the truth. Tell them the truth when you're talking to them. Don't sugarcoat things. Don't make it a selling job to them and ignoring the negatives. Make sure you give them the full spectrum of why you're doing what you're doing and how it might impact them. And then last but not least, probably the most important, I believe the thing that has given me and our staff here the greatest success in this is that we absolutely are landowner centric. Groundwater user centric, and so we always convey to them a continuing interest on our part to be deadly serious about including their interests front and center when we're trying to come up with solutions to solve the sustainability issues. And so those would be, I think, the 3 most important things I would pass along to anybody before they talk to their constituents.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you providing the written response and verbal response. That was a really thoughtful question and very pertinent, considering what you were talking about and the complexities of getting folks to participate. So thanks for responding there. And then I think one last question, and this one's for Stephanie, and it's from Michael Selling. Stephanie, I'm sure if I misunderstood, but did that second graph that you had presented reflect only the county GSA participating in the step down, or all the GSAs in that basin?
Thank you. That's a good question. So that was a sample hydrograph, and currently the county GSA, which represents all of the acres that don't have typically a surface supply, is the only one with an allocation. So yes, that's only the county GSA.
Got it. Thank you, Stephanie. I think that does it for questions. Look like we've answered it, all of them in the question and answer thing, but also we're running a little bit over time, but I think that's okay. We'll be able to make it up in our breakout session.
Thank you so much for your participation in the breakout rooms. It's always good to have the conversation, especially following the panelist presentations. And now we're going to further build on this and introduce Aaron Crandall, who will be giving the DWR assistance update. So Aaron, take it away.
Thanks so much. And hi, everyone. Good morning. It's been a full morning. I almost said good afternoon, yeah, we would like to speak today about a well permitting analysis and observed conditions report that we are writing at the department. And so I will close out our presentations today with this topic. Next slide, please. So this report is in response to Executive Order N722, which has come up today a few times. Specifically, this report's focusing on Action 9. And as many of us know, the executive order was enacted in March of 2022. And what Action 9 had two parts. And so this spoke to responsibilities that agencies had for new wells or alterations to existing wells and the permitting of those. So Action 9A specifically discussed the requirements for consultation between local enforcement agencies or local permitting agencies to coordinate with and consult with GSAs prior to approving a well permit. And specifically, this would be done in high and medium priority basins where there was a GSA and an adopted GSP. And these agencies were, the permitting agency was required to obtain written verification from the GSA that the proposed well would be consistent with the GSP and or groundwater sustainability plan and the sustainability goals for the basin or subbasin. So part 9B discussed the required evaluation prior to the issuance of a well permit, which had to evaluate that the well would, number one, not likely interfere with the production and functioning of existing nearby wells, and would not likely to cause adverse subsidence impacts or damage nearby infrastructure. So the executive order did exclude individual domestic wells and public water supply system wells who relied exclusively on groundwater. Next slide, please. So the department is putting together a report, and this is based on a few different avenues of information. The first being a survey that we conducted. So we sent a survey to both GSAs and counties or local permitting agencies. And this was sent out approximately a year after the executive order had been in place, so earlier this spring. And many of you probably participated in this survey, so we wanted to take this moment just to thank you for your feedback and your time in providing this information. The goal of our survey was to hear from local entities what approaches were or were not successful, and to centralize suggestions for improved longer-term coordination of well permitting processes and groundwater management beyond the executive order. We also spoke to local community residents, and we have also we've also talked with external partners in this space. So next slide, please. So I will go through a high level summary of the responses we got in our survey. We received responses from 29 counties, which you can see on the map are highlighted in blue, and then also from GSAs within 42 basins or subbasins. And out of our 21 critically overdrafted basins, we got 11 responses, so about half of that area. And then just a little less than half from all of our high and medium priority basins. And across the state, you can see the pie chart there. We had a pretty good representation throughout the state. Next slide, please. So we asked GSAs and counties what consultation and coordination methods they were using in order to comply with the executive order. And our most popular response was that there were specific procedures put in place after the EO was enacted. There were a lot of responses indicating that other regular communication was happening. A lot of agencies had been coordinating in this space already, so that was good to see. Periodic meetings was something that agencies were holding regularly, and then some shared policies were also enacted. And some of our other responses included, we have staff in both agencies, on the GSA and in the county, so coordination for us is pretty easy and done at will. One respondent said they issued a resolution that the GSA had determined that well permits in their basin would not be inconsistent with the adopted GSP. So that was pretty clear. And then, sorry, next slide, please. We also asked about the written verification process that agencies were conducting, and apologize for the small text. Our most popular response was that the GSA would perform the evaluation on a new well permit application prior to issuance of that permit by the local well permitting agency and do a technical review. GSAs would also make findings from reviewing these permits and provide recommendations to local permit agencies. And that another popular one was that the two agencies would develop a shared form, tool, or process that would route well permit applications to try to streamline the process. Some of the other responses we got were that they would just meet as required and obtain verification in real time. Also that GSAs would provide information to the permitting agencies upon request. And we had a few responses that said that they relied on the local permitting agency setback requirements and deemed those sufficient. And then many agencies also contracted with a professional such as a hydrogeologist or an engineer to certify the well permitting applications and obtain that written verification. Next slide, please. So when we asked about how agencies were complying with the executive order, we got a pretty varied response. So we'll start at the top of the pie chart where in blue you can see about 5% of respondents said that they received no responses or their requests for consultation were not granted. About half the chart shows difficulty in communication and inadequate staffing or consulting resources, insufficient funding, and lack of relevant technical information. And then about a quarter of respondents said that they had no issues in complying with the executive order, so that was good to hear. But 21% had additional information in their other issues, which included negative impacts to well applicants due to some agencies actually stopped their permitting processes altogether while they developed, the methods and systems to comply with the executive order. Some felt that there was an overreach by consultants urging permitting agencies to include additional analyses that they weren't sure were actually required for the executive order. And an overwhelming response of customer relations with permit applicants due to any increased expenses, to help with those, the issues that they, you can see in the other answers in the pie chart, or in delaying permits. And then lastly, the agency's opinion of non-autonomy in this process. So what we saw in terms of a permit delay, it ranged anywhere from 1 to 2 hours up to 3 to 6 months, but the most popular response was about an average of 2 weeks. So next slide, please. As I said earlier, we asked for local recommendations for improvements to the executive order. We got a wide range of responses, from anywhere to keeping the executive order as is, to just getting rid of it entirely. And most of the popular responses in between were recommendations to include the development of new tools, data support, financial support, and guidance from the state to make the language of the executive order or anything that comes after it more clear on roles and responsibilities, which made sense given the challenges that we saw that I highlighted in the previous slide. So next slide, please. So that's the end of the survey summary that I had. And so we have a few slides to show the data that we have observed in the time that the executive order was enacted. And these were put together using the data sets, tools, and that were highlighted earlier in this forum, primarily by Ben Brezing and Stephen Springhorn. And so you may be familiar with these already, but as you can see on the right, we have, we're showing the locations of the voluntary dry well reports that we got during the time that the executive order was enacted. And so you can see on, you can see on the right in purple that those are outages and issues that were reported after the executive order was enacted, and the green dots show resolved issues in that time. On the left, you can see the top 10 counties for reports to the dry well system. Again, this is a voluntary reporting system. Next slide, please. The next set of data that we observed were based on our well completion report system. And so on the right-hand side, you can see the wells that were permitted and installed after the executive order was enacted. The red dots were permitted and installed after the executive order was enacted. And then the blue dots on this map were installed wells that actually were permitted on or before the executive order went into effect, and then were installed after. Again, on the left-hand side, you can see the top 10 counties for well installations during the time of executive order. Next slide, please. And our last point of observed data is related to subsidence, and specifically this was mentioned in the executive order. And so what we're showing on the left-hand side is the various vertical displacements and subsidence across the state from just after the enactment of the executive order through July 1st of this year. And then on the right-hand side, this is a zoomed in view of the data that we see in and around the extent of the Corcoran Clay area, so that you can see that extent in blue, where the green wells within that area are between 40 and 900 feet deep, and the red wells are greater than 900 feet. The yellow dots outside the extent of the Corcoran Clay are those are all the wells installed outside that extent, and just to show the number of wells in that area. So next slide, please. So that's it for the DWR well analysis and observations. And I wanted to also point out, as I alluded to earlier, we had external partners who have been interested in this effort as well. So the Groundwater Resources Association, GRA, have also been working on a resource on this topic. And so they are working on a white paper that will cover common technical approaches to evaluate a well permit to comply with the executive order, and also the limitations of those approaches. The white paper will also address policy questions, such as when it's appropriate for CEQA versus ministerial processes, and then recent court cases that also clarify possible distinctions between those. And lastly, the paper will cover administrative approaches to well permitting, including concurrent review or sequential review between GSAs and counties, the pros and cons of those approaches, and the importance of public engagement. The white paper is expected to be published at the end of November or beginning of December, and it will be available via the publication avenues at the bottom of the slide there. GRA also welcomes comments on their white paper on the content from GSA and county staff or technical practitioners and interested parties, which will help them improve future iterations of the technical content that GRA could offer on this topic. So if you have any comments, GRA would like to encourage you to send them to staff@grac.org. And next slide, please. So just as a wrap up for today on this topic, if you have any questions related to DWR's well permitting analysis report, Marisa has put in our address there. And if you have any public comments or questions on GRA's well permitting EO white paper, please send them to staff@grac.org. Thank you again for your time, and I will pass it back to Keith.
Thank you, Erin. Really appreciate you providing the update. As Erin mentioned, to provide any feedback on the topic, please reach out to us after the event using the link in the chat, or utilize the event survey that we'll be distributing shortly. So one other thing that just wanted to remind you all of is some of the other available assistance from DWR. First couple are Facilitation Support Services Program and the Written Translation Services Program, which are currently available to GSAs or others working with GSAs to implement SGMA. Facilitation Support Services is where we provide, upon request, a third-party facilitator outside of DWR to support engagement efforts like meetings, public meetings, just general GSA meetings or other type of coordination efforts. Written translation is a service that will translate GSA outreach and engagement documents in up to 8 different languages. And then we have a new item on here, which is verbal interpretive services. And that will allow for real-time verbal translation for public meetings. As mentioned, this is a new service. It will be coming online soon. We recently piloted this in a few areas, and it was very successful. And we were fortunate to receive some funding this last budget year to expand this into a full-scale program, which we're currently doing. So more information will be available on this and shared through our newsletter and website in the coming months. And you can apply for these services anytime through our assistance and engagement webpage. And then the last item we have on here is that I just wanted to remind you all that we recently released our GSP implementation guidance document, and it's now available on our best management practices and guidance documents webpage. Next slide, please. So as we're wrapping up here, just wanted to share a few next step items with you. Please complete the event survey. The links can be provided in the chat here. And we put this survey together because we want these events to be relevant and beneficial to you. We're going to use these the results of these surveys to inform what our next theme should be in our next forum, and then how we can also improve the structure of the forum. These have been really beneficial for past forums and have really helped us develop the subsequent ones. And then also please keep an eye out for some post-event materials. This includes a recording of the panel presentations and the Q&A session. And then there will also be a directory of forum participants. And so we'll notify you all via email when those are available, but it should be somewhere around the end of November. And then we really hope that you join us for our next GSA forum, and so we'll share a save the date for that event through our Sigmo newsletter. And then if you have any questions about the forum itself, please contact our sgmps@water.ca.gov email. Next slide, please. So lastly here, want to thank you all again for attending today's forum. We really appreciate your engagement in our breakout sessions and for providing the questions during the panel Q&A. I just want to say a huge thank you to our forum panelists, Jameson, Stephanie, Matt, and Marcus. Just really appreciate you taking the time to develop your presentations and then your willingness to share your lessons learned. Next, want to thank Stantec for helping us organize and run this event. Thanks to Atlee for facilitating, for operating the breakout sessions, Christy for hosting the Zoom meeting, Marissa for monitoring the chat and sharing the pertinent links here in the chat feature. And then I know there's many others I'm probably forgetting, but really appreciate you all supporting this event. And then thank you to the DWR team for acting as facilitators and recorders, and for leading these breakout sessions. And then lastly here, a huge thank you to Amelia Wisniewski and Marissa Lustel from DWR for planning, organizing, and leading this event. Just couldn't have done it without you. And so just, big appreciation there. So that does it for the fall 2023 GSA Forum. Look forward to seeing you all again at the next one. Thanks again, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.